Roll.
Councilmember Kinzinger.
Present.
Councilmember Dickinson.
Here.
Councilmember Hepperly.
Here.
Councilmember Schumacher.
Present.
Councilmember Packard.
Present.
Vice Mayor Hunt.
Here.
Mayor Plaguda.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thanks, ma'am. Jumping right into this, Mr. Wadsworth, I believe you're going to lead us off.
It's not working.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk to you about the PFAS issue related to the water quality that you're all aware of. Prescott's been, going through this issue, and after they noticed that, were notified that their wells had some of the PFAS chemicals, we obviously went out and sampled ours as well, and we found PFAS in some of our wells. So we're going to talk to you today about what all this means, what the status of it is, what are our next steps, and some of those sorts of things. Joining us today, we have two representatives from ADEQ. One of them is Paula Panzino, and she's the Chief Science Officer, and she'll be giving a presentation here momentarily. And also Randy Mattis, who is the Deputy Director of Water Quality. So I'm going to ask them to come up and give their presentation. It's going to give you a lot of background information about what it is and those sorts of things. And then I will follow up with a presentation more on the local level and what it means for us here. And so with that, I will ask Paula to come up and start the presentation.
Welcome, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here to speak with you about PFAS. I'm Paula Panzino. I'm the Chief Science Officer for ADEQ. I've been with ADEQ for about 5 years. My background is a master's in environmental engineering, as well as an undergraduate in geology. So I've spent most of my career dealing with contamination in groundwater, remediation mostly. My role at ADEQ as Chief Science Officer is to promote technical excellence within the agency. I also serve as the PFAS lead for the agency. So I've prepared a presentation for you today that should give you an overview of PFAS, where we've found it in the state, what the status of the federal regulations are, what the status of what Arizona is doing. So I'll start. Let me just figure out the controls here. So first slide. It's probably been a while for all of you to see the molecular structure of an organic compound. This is your typical PFAS. It is man-made, so it's not something that occurs in nature. What it's typically made of is a long chain of carbon compounds that are fully fluorinated. And the length of that chain makes a difference, as well as the functional group on the head, as to its characteristics, both in the human body and in the environment. Earlier on, when we were producing perfluorinated compounds, these longer chain compounds were known to, were used in several different types of manufacturing processes. And I'll go over that in the future. What I wanted to point out here is there are two different types of sources, right? There are primary exposures to human beings, and then there are secondary exposures that occur through human processes. And I'll go over what that cycle looks like in a later slide. What I wanted to point out through this slide, as you can see, is that PFAS is used in many of our everyday products, right? So what you see on this slide here is carpets, carpet cleaning, food packaging, furnishings, cosmetics, outdoor gear, all that stuff that you buy for weatherproofing, to make sure that your shirts are less wrinkled when they come out of the dryer, adhesives and sealants, polymers, Teflon. Everybody mostly has heard of the issue with PFTE in Teflon. coatings on car seats. So when little kids are dropping and eating in the car and so they put the coating on the textiles that are comprised of the car seats, and then firefighting foam. I put the glass of drinking water last, right? Because that one is a preventable exposure, right? We have these products all around us. There are some things that you can do to control your exposure to PFAS. You can select the products that you buy very carefully. What we do know is that in 2014, 2015 timeframe, PFAS were phased out of production in the United States. But as you know, a lot of our products come from overseas, right? So even though they may not be in American-made products, you may have PFAS present, the PFOA and PFOS, those longer chain compounds may be present in products that come into the United States from other countries. So here's a mix, right? It's a mix of good news and bad news. What we're seeing on this slide is the first bullet is 99% of people have PFAS in their blood. So this testing was done by the ATSDR. They've done surveys of multiple groups of people over 2-year timeframes where they come back and sample blood serum levels for PFAS, specifically PFOA and PFOS. So those two compounds, PFOA and PFOS, are precursor compounds. They're longer chain. They break down into shorter chain compounds, such as Gen X, that are equally, if not more toxic, and have human health impacts as the longer chains. So even though manufacturing is doing some work in determining shorter chain compounds and substituting those into our manufacturing streams, there's no guarantee that those shorter chain compounds are any less toxic because they haven't been studied yet. So we don't have data on them. Another thing that I wanted to mention is there are, so what's the number now? I've heard numbers ranging from 12,000 all the way to 20,000 different types of PFAS compounds in manufacturing. Only 600 of them have been identified to be in the manufacturing stream. So 20,000 of these different types of fully fluorinated carbon compounds, only 600 have been identified. So you can see here, that's kind of bad news, good news, right? So the good news is that in your blood serum level, what they found is that those concentrations are dropping, and they're dropping significantly. So time frame from 1999 to 2000 to 2017 and 2018, that's over a 17 to 18 year time frame. You've seen drops in PFOS levels and drops in PFOA levels by 85 and 70%. Again, I need to qualify the data, right? So we're looking for PFOA and PFOS in blood serum. There are a whole host of other PFAS compounds that have been produced to replace them, but we don't have toxicological data for them. So good news, it's reducing over time. Bad news, we're being exposed to these newer replacement compounds for which we have no data. Sources to the environment. So we talked about human exposures. These are sources to the environment. Major sources are firefighting foam. So you may or may not have heard that AFFF, which is aqueous fluorinated firefighting foam, I use the acronym so much sometimes it's hard to remember what it means. This is something that was patented in the 1960s. They created a military specification for the use of this AFFF firefighting foam for use on high-intensity petroleum fires. So it's not used for wildfire fighting. It's not used for other types of firefighting. It's specifically reserved for high-intensity firefighting foam. You can see why the military would be interested in this, right? Airplane crashes, things that are going on with training, firefighting activities on the bases. And what you find in the state of Arizona is that the major sources of PFAS to the environment and to people's exposure is through use of firefighting foam during training events. So training events occurring on airports. So FAA followed suit. They have a mil spec for using AFFF for firefighting. FAA adopted that military specification for AFFF and mandated that all Part 139 airports all over the country have the ability and the manpower and the resources to use this mil-spec AFFF at all of their airports. So what we find in Arizona is that the major sources of PFAS to the environment are associated with the military bases. I have a map that I'll show you later on in the presentation. So we have airports, we've discussed those, industrial sites. So as you can imagine from the consumer products that we were looking at earlier, PFAS manufacturing facilities are a source of PFAS to the environment. That can occur through releases from stacks. That can also occur through releases to wastewater and wastewater treatment. It also can occur through direct discharge because it wasn't regulated for a very long time. And it still isn't regulated today, right? In Arizona, we're fortunate that there are not large manufacturing facilities that we've been able to discover that are using PFAS in such a manner. But there are smaller things, such as metal plating facilities, foundries. Again, the firefighting, not only the airports, but the fire training facilities. You know, so those fire departments that are going out and training their staff on the use of AFFF have been doing so on a monthly basis for ever since they've been training, right? So for a very long time. And then we're looking at secondary sources. So all of those consumer products that have PFAS in them go into a landfill. So if the landfill isn't lined and the PFAS seeps out into the groundwater from the landfill, that's another source. Wastewater treatment plants and biosolids. So I have some data to share with you on wastewater treatment facilities. I know that you've had your own sampled. It is pretty common to find PFAS both in the influent and the effluent. So biosolids, that's our end product, right? And then the cycle goes around because Class 1 biosolids are used for application for agriculture. And then there's uptake by plants and there's uptake by animals. So this is a depiction of the whole cycle here. We've talked about most of the pieces in this cycle, where human exposure occurs, where exposures to the environment and releases to the environment occur, from consumer products to people to our waste infrastructure. We've got the use of AFFF, the production from industry, all going into the environment and then all coming back out again through our food cycle. So these are a summary of the health effects. I'm not a toxicologist. I took this from the ATSDR website. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm an environmental professional, right? So this is what they're reporting as health effects. One thing to note when we look at the health advisory levels is those health advisory levels are over a lifetime of exposure, right? So it's not just, excuse me, a drink of water here and there. It's drinking that water for 70 years. And that's the level that you're that they're saying may result in these health effects. So I'm going to transition over now to what the EPA is doing. There has been a lot of activity on the EPA's part and the DOD's part. So DOD is working toward assessing all of the military bases, understanding where PFAS has been used, understanding if PFAS has affected the communities around the bases. The EPA, so this is the phase out of US manufacturing in 2015. The right column are all the things that EPA has completed. It's a long list of things. So they're attacking it from a lot of different angles. They're primarily putting emphasis on exposures through drinking water. So through changes to the Safe Drinking Water Act, they've promulgated health advisory levels. Those health advisory levels have been revised 3 times, right? So the most recently, they've been revised down, and I have a slide on those, so we'll look at those later. But they've been revised 3 times because the studies and the science has been developing over time. And as they've discovered and understood the impacts, the health impacts, they have lowered the health advisory levels for PFOA and PFOS. Another thing that I want to point out on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side of this slide is the maximum contaminant level. So once a maximum contaminant level is promulgated, that gives us the federal standard, right? Which then would likely be adopted by ADEQ. So that's a federal standard that would apply to both drinking water and groundwater. It would be, we're expecting a draft of that number or those numbers for PFOA and PFOS this fall. So that's when we're expecting an MCL. The final MCL will likely come the following year. So they issue a draft, they put it out for public comment, they gather up all the public comments, they respond to the public comments, and then they finalize the number. So there's always a proposed draft and then a final. It can be a very long process. They have actually accelerated this process. This is the first MCL that they've issued for any contaminant in a long time. What happened recently, and so I didn't move it over to the right-hand side, and it's still proposed, is this designation of PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substance under CERCLA. So CERCLA is basically the Superfund Act. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to explore and understand sources, go after responsible parties under the Superfund program. Other things, the unregulated contaminant monitoring. So unregulated contaminant monitoring rule is the sampling that's conducted under the Safe Drinking Water Act by the EPA. That sampling, number 3, so the third sampling event, was conducted in 2018. Their number 5, so UCMR is the acronym, UCMR 5 will be starting in January. What ADEQ is proposing to do is to sample all of the drinking water systems that are not included in UCMR 5. So UCMR 5 is for larger drinking water systems. However, and Randy can correct me on this, but I think it's somewhere between 85 and 90% of the drinking water systems in the state of Arizona are small, right? Small communities. And so UCMR 5, the EPA's testing, will not cover those drinking water systems. So what ADEQ is doing is using federal funding to go out and sample all of those public water systems. That was a press release that was issued, I think it was last week. So here we are looking at the health advisories. There are health advisories for 4 PFAS compounds: PFOA, PFOS, the Gen X chemicals, and PFBS. So PFOA and PFOS are those longer chain compounds that I was talking about earlier. The Gen X chemicals were actually shorter chain compounds that were manufactured to replace PFOA and PFOS. And then they did some toxicological studies and decided, these are also toxic. And so they've decided to put in a health advisory for the Gen X compounds as well. They are the most commonly found, and in some cases, the most persistent in what we're seeing in groundwater. So these concentrations, the 0.004 parts per trillion and the 0.02 parts per trillion, right, for PFOA and PFOS, those concentrations are lower than what can be detected in a laboratory. So the implications of setting a health advisory lower than what can be detected in a laboratory. All I could think of when I saw those numbers was, okay, they've got some toxicological data that made it, in their minds, essential to lower the health advisory limit. So the science that they're using and their understanding of the toxicological effects made it essential for them to lower this to below what a laboratory can detect. So this is crazy, right? It's crazy in terms of trying to message it. It's crazy in terms of trying to understand even what a part per trillion is. And so that's why I added the graphic at the bottom. A part per trillion is one drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It's a really, really tiny, tiny amount. And those numbers, 0.004, that's not a part per trillion, that's 4 parts per quadrillion. PPQ, not even PPT. So we're talking about very, very, very tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. The minimum reporting limit that you see there, so there are approved methods for the analysis of these PFAS compounds. The approved methods include method 537, 533. There's a wastewater method called 1633. It's not on the slide if you were looking for it. The point that I want to make is that the minimum reporting limit levels on this slide are what is given by the EPA, but the labs can reach down to somewhere between 1.6 and 1.9 using different methods, but they still can't break that barrier into the quadrillion level. I've talked to some graduate students, University of Texas, University of Wisconsin, and they're saying that with the equipment, the state-of-the-art equipment that they have in their laboratories at the universities, they can reach parts per quadrillion, but the method hasn't been approved yet. Like, it's not a consistent something that we can do every single time, precise and accurately. So I'm going to pause here. You all have been really attentive. I really appreciate that. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Question. Because I knew we were going to be talking about this. Are you familiar with the movie that was made in 2019?
I am familiar with the group of folks in the Minnesota DNR that were working on the issue.
Well,
with
this
Blackwater.
movie was made in 2019. It's called Dark Waters.
Yes.
And it happens in West Virginia. And the only reason I became aware of it was last weekend. We was talking to some friends, and he moved from West Virginia. So I watched that movie. You can pull it up on Netflix. It's called Dark Water. But it talks about PFAS. First of all, I was kind of confused because in the movie, it only talked about PFOA and PFO8. And they didn't talk about PFAS. But it talks about this attorney going after DuPont from 1975 to approximately, I'm thinking 2015, 2016 when he finally settled, but he was DuPont's worst nightmare. So if anybody wants to get, I think, a little bit of a feel, it may glorify it. I don't think it really glorifies, but it just talks about what we're doing. We're killing ourselves, basically what it amounts to. And DuPont knew about it originally. So it's interesting that what you're sharing with us today. And the other thing that I have a question on, when you were talking about the firefighters, how many of us know firefighters that have gone on disability due to cancer? Now, is this cancer related to potentially to this? I would say yes. I don't, maybe other things, but there is a lot of firefighters that go on disability. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if you're at liberty or if you know anything about that, but is that one of the main reasons that firefighters are getting it?
I have no specific knowledge or data to support that. Firefighters are exposed to many, many different things in the course of their jobs.
Right.
It's a very admirable profession, for sure.
Right.
You know, the inhalation hazards that they're exposed to, the AFFF, that might be coating their actual suits.
Right.
Yes, you know, so I have no specific knowledge of
Right.
that, but it is kind of hard to escape the knowledge of it happens, they get cancer.
Yes.
They're exposed to an agent that we know causes cancer.
Yeah. One of the things that when this attorney was working on it initially, he figured it out there with the formula that was 8 parts of carbon, you know, and you repeated that today. So it goes, this movie, it is a true story. I mean, it happened in 1975. But I think if people want to get a better understanding of what we're talking about, I'd at least watch it to help get you a little bit of knowledge of what's going on. Thank you for your information, though.
Thank you for sharing that.
Is there, the only way to actually get rid of this is to filter it out, or what would happen if you boiled water? Will it enhance this as a chemical, or would it clean it out? Is the only way to get rid of it, is it to filter it?
Yes.
Okay.
So boiling, you cannot issue a boil water notice for PFAS because it will not work.
RO system work?
Yes.
RO will.
So RO, I have this on a later slide, but RO, granular activated carbon, and ion exchange are the 3 major drinking water treatment processes that will treat PFAS and remove PFAS. The thing about RO is that it creates like a 20% waste stream, and then you're stuck with trying to figure out how to dispose of that waste stream.
Okay. Okay.
You know, so it's not something that I would recommend. What ADEQ has done with the treatment facility that we installed in Tucson is we started a pilot demonstration project where we used ion exchange because Tucson water is also using granular activated carbon. So we wanted to be able to collect data on both treatment types in order to better understand the ins and outs of the different treatments and the costs and the operating costs.
So that's what the cities are doing, but a lot of us already have RO systems in our homes.
That's right.
So we're taking care of ourselves, but the water that we're putting down the drain is more concentrated, is what you're saying.
Yes, your wastewater is concentrating the PFAS and then it's sending it to your wastewater treatment plant.
Okay.
Okay.
All done?
I'm done, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here. And I want to give a shout out to Jacobs, our extended staff that's back there. Thank you guys for being here. So it's encouraging, I think, that the blood level concentration's going down.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And is that because of the 14-15 phase out? It is, okay.
Yes, I believe so.
So sounds like kind of what you're saying is Buy American?
So I would not, I would not make
Right,
that recommendation, but you can definitely draw that conclusion from from the messaging that you hear out there.
Right. So it's interesting because I remember Neil telling us, I just happened to pass him in the hallway, and he said that he got a call from somebody that said they'd already done the research and they had to change their dental floss.
Yep.
Could be.
So that coating on your dental floss, that makes it slip between your teeth.
And then aren't most landfills lined? They're required as part of their conditions when they come in? I mean, in a municipality like this, ours would be lined.
So it depends on the age of the landfill and whether or not it predates when the subtitle C requirements came into play. Again, it depends on the age of the landfill. We do have landfills in Arizona that are not lined and that have been closed.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. All right. You're going to steal all my thunder with all your good questions. I was going to cover some of this in some of the later slides, but this is awesome. So Arizona state law, what we've done is we've banned the use of AFFF for training purposes. So for training purposes, but you can use it for training if you have secondary containment, right? So this is a law that went through in fiscal year 2020. It's been on the books for a while, and what we hope is there's been no enforcement of this law, but I hope that people would do the right thing and, implement some protection for the environment when they're doing their training activities. This next slide is about the news release. I spoke about this earlier. Our Safe Drinking Water team in Randy's division will be implementing a statewide sampling event of those small drinking water systems that will not be covered under the EPA's EPA sampling that's supposed to start in January. And so we're ramping up a program, hiring people, getting our planning in place in order to go out and sample drinking water systems in the state of Arizona.
I have a question about the drinking water then. What about the ranches that are out in the country where the acreages, where they have their own wells? Will they be tested, or will the state be testing those, or will it be up to them to pay the money to get their wells tested?
It will be up to them to get their wells tested.
Okay.
ADEQ does not have any authority over private well owners. And because we are deploying resources to look at public water systems and the impacts of PFAS to the larger populations, unfortunately, that does leave private well owners on their own to get their water tested if they're concerned. So we do have, however, a procedure that has been written for homeowners to use to do that sampling. Because as you can imagine, with all of the consumer products that have PFAS in them, it can be very easy to cross-contaminate a sample, right? You put your sunscreen on and then you go and you take a sample and it falls into your sample bottle and lo and behold, you have PFAS when you didn't really have PFAS in your water. So there is sampling procedures on ADEQ's website. It's the PFAS resources website. Neil has a copy of this presentation. There's links there for all of the information that I'm sharing with you today. So you can use that sampling procedure, identify a lab, collect the sample, send it off to the laboratory. The samples are usually costing for individual samples, it's somewhere between $300 and $500.
So if they had PFAS, that might give them a reason to hook up to town or city water.
That would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Yes. So what you're looking at here is a map of the state of Arizona. The size of the bubble and the color of the bubble on this map is commensurate to PFAS concentrations. So what we've done here with the data is we've taken PFOA and PFOS concentrations and added them together. And that's what we're seeing on this map. So the green is non-detect. The yellow dots are 10 or less. The orange dots are 100 or less. And the red dots, so red is always your warning, your warning color, right? It's greater than 100. So you can see the spread of where we're seeing those yellow, orange, and red dots where we've found PFOA plus PFOS in drinking water systems. So this is a compilation of data that ADEQ has collected from drinking water systems, EPA, as well as some of the Central Tucson project data that we've collected in the city of Tucson. So the message here is you're not alone, right? You're not the only town that's been impacted by PFAS that has PFAS in its drinking water. There are approximately 56 drinking water systems that have detected PFAS in them. And I say detected because, as I was saying earlier, the health advisory limit is below the detection limit. So if it's been detected, it's above the health advisory limit. So 56 out of the 207 that have been sampled in the state. We've also done a wastewater treatment plant study where we've asked for wastewater treatment facilities to voluntarily take samples, and we would pay for those analyses. Those results show one wastewater treatment plant out of 38 had no PFAS present, right? So 37 out of the 38 detected PFAS. 10 biosolids samples out of the 38 had PFAS in them. So I'd like to remind you, think about wastewater treatment plant, the effluent, reclaimed water, and how reclaimed water is used, and that it can be a source. The city of Marana has installed a $5 million treatment system. $5 to $7 million treatment system, I believe. They are also dealing with TCE and 1,4-dioxane in their water. And so their system is a little more sophisticated than what you would need to treat just one contaminant, right? What's happening in the city of Tucson is they have 2 military bases, right? They have Davis-Monthan Air Force Base and Morris Air National Guard. There are PFAS plumes emanating from both of those bases, traveling underneath the residential neighborhoods that are to the north, because that's the direction of groundwater flow. Those concentrations are in the thousands of parts per trillion in groundwater. Morris Air National Guard Base is co-located and is also a responsible party for a Superfund site called the Tucson International Airport area. Davis-Monthan does not currently have any Superfund-related activity going on, but the plume that's coming from that location is traveling north into Tucson Central drinking water well field. So we've done some things there. This was started back when the health advisory limit was 70. So we were targeting places that were above 70 parts per trillion. Tucson is finding PFAS in their reclaimed water. They're finding it in their storm water. They're finding it in their groundwater because before the health advisory was lowered, they were not treating for it, or before there was a health advisory, they were not treating for it. And so it has traveled throughout their water cycle throughout the city. So second largest population in the state of Arizona. Endangered drinking water aquifers when we're in a state of drought, as you all realize. One of the other things that Arizona is doing, or ADEQ is doing, is we're looking at those FAA Part 139 airports. So those Part 139 airports are the ones that are required to have AFFF in stock and have a firefighting team able to use AFFF. We're looking at those airports, and that is what spurred the sampling around the airport in the city of Prescott. We contacted our safe drinking water team, and we said, hey, I know you guys are out there sampling. Can you take some extra samples around the airport over here? We'd like to know whether or not there's PFAS there, and that's what kind of started this to where we are now. So these are just examples, letterhead showing the different notifications that ADEQ has been sending out. We've been sending notifications and basically just trying to share the information. Is if you're using PFAS, please be careful with it. Don't release it. We don't have the authority right now without an MCL to regulate it. But what we wanted to do was kind of get the word out and ask folks to be aware of it and to be careful of their practices. So we've notified Tier 2 industries. We've notified some private well owners in different parts of Tucson, as well as in the city of Prescott. We've notified the fire districts and the Fire Chiefs Association, LEPCs, again, the FAA Part 139 airports, and the public health and vector control, because PFAS has been associated with the coatings in the containers for mosquito repellent. So we did some research with the EPA as to, okay, are people purchasing this type of mosquito repellent in Arizona? And we found that for the most part, no. That specific make and brand of mosquito repellent is not purchased widely in Arizona. So that one is sort of, it didn't pan out, didn't go anywhere in a good way. So what are other Arizona public water systems doing? So very similar to what your own public water system has done. They're taking wells offline. They're putting together blending plans and changing their operating procedures. They're drilling, some water systems in remote places are drilling new water supply wells in order to replace the single water supply well that they may have. They don't have the redundancy that you have built into your own system. They are assessing treatment options. And so we talked about the granular activated carbon and the ion exchange as being the major treatment technologies available for removing PFAS to non-detect levels in drinking water. Folks are submitting applications for federal funding. So there are a few different types of federal funding available through IIJA, which is also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. That act contains funding for emerging contaminants and addressing emerging contaminants. That funding is funneled from EPA through to Arizona State with the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. So they have a pot of money that that has specific designated uses for emerging contaminants such as PFAS. So small drinking water systems that can demonstrate that they're financially viable can apply for forgivable loans through WIFA to have treatment design and implement and constructed for their systems. They're joining class action lawsuits, right? And so as far as I know, and I haven't done an exhaustive search, but I know that Tucson has joined the very large class action lawsuit that involves holding the original manufacturers of PFAS responsible. There are many, many parties involved, and Over the years, these class action lawsuits have been combined into one large one. So those are some of the things that, other communities in Arizona are doing. Another thing, and I've spoken to Neil Wadsworth about this, is we've been having an interagency call. So this call is monthly, and it involves all of the stakeholders and public works departments for Marana, Tucson, Pima County DEQ. City of Prescott recently joined us, and I think Neil indicated that he would be willing to join us. It's a call where we talk about the status of the sampling, where it's being found, what we're doing about it, what type of treatments are being installed, what the status are on the Air Force bases and the military bases. And then we talk about messaging. What major media inquiries have there been, and what kind of messaging are we sending out there to our concerned citizens? So my last page here is just a page of links and resources if you wanted to go and search around to find out more information about PFAS. Most of the information that I've shared with you today can be found through these links. So this is the end of my presentation. If you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer if I can.
Ma'am, I think when people hear water and contaminants or chemicals, they start to, stress out a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think probably over the last 60 years, I'm sure there's numerous different times that the government has recognized things such as, asbestos or lead paint, or heck, at one point I think blue M&Ms were causing cancer, right, back in the 60s. How concerning should people be knowing that this PFAS exists in their daily lives? On a scale of 1 to 10, with being exposed to lead paint and asbestos being a 10, where would you put it for people?
So in comparison to other contaminants, that's interesting.
In regards to what the cause, like what side effects or what it causes in regards to cancers or birth defects, things like that, like where would you rate?
So it's not an acute contaminant. In other words, until you get to very, very high concentrations, which you would not be exposed to in your everyday life, it is not acute. There are some contaminants that are acute, right? Arsenic, nitrate, higher concentrations of uranium. Those are acute contaminants. This one is not.
So like people aren't just drinking a concentrated bottle of this. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not
Right.
something that is directly affecting their body, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't prioritize it over things like lead or arsenic or, and so that's the struggle, right, at ADEQ, because
Sure.
we already have sites that are contaminated with these things, and we're working on fixing them and cleaning them up. And then all of a sudden PFAS comes in, and it's a huge, it's the newest, greatest thing, I guess, right? It's the next wave after chlorinated solvents if you've been in the environmental industry for a long time. The biggest thing that a lot of consultants have made their money off of is chlorinated solvents, is dry cleaner, right? Releases from dry cleaners. PFAS is the next wave. Should you be concerned about it? You can make some choices in your own lives about what products you buy. Am I concerned about it for me and my family? I do what I can,
Sure.
right? And that's all we all can do.
Would you say that if we never tested for it, would 20 years from now or 30 years from now, would there be cluster outbreaks of any type of issues health-wise? I know it's hard to predict that, but would that be something that would, in your opinion, happen?
Again, I am not a toxicologist.
Sure.
That's a very difficult question to answer. In my opinion, the exposure that you might have gotten from eating popcorn or using the Teflon pan that you probably chucked out 10 years ago is much higher than drinking the water that at the levels that were detected in your water system.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It's good to know. Councilman?
Just a question, can PFAS come in the rain when we get rain? Is that possible or not?
You read that article, didn't
No, I
you?
yeah.
We watched it on Netflix.
So there was a study that was published recently that said that PFAS has been detected in rainwater in remote regions of the world. What can you do about that, right?
Nothing. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have any other questions?
Just one more question. When you were talking about small wells in areas, what designates like a small town going from getting help as a community, or are they considered a small wellhead if they're not servicing a large area or a lot of people? Like we're obviously at, one of the larger communities, correct? We're not considered a small community, but like let's say Ajo or some of the smaller towns in Arizona, what's considered when they're too small to get help?
So, Randy, do you want to handle that one? 3,300 connections or people? 3,300 people.
3,300 population. Okay, thank you.
Good job, Randy.
He's my backup.
So Paula, you mentioned that this leaks into the ground, comes through agriculture. So in our food products, meats especially, the animals, and also our pets, how concerned should we be with reference to our choices, as you mentioned, in eating various food products, especially animals and agriculture? I guess it covers everything.
Yeah, so that is really hard to say because there are no regulations right now around wastewater treatment plant effluent and biosolids when it comes to PFAS. There are not a lot of published studies out there about, so I've read a lot of media stories and or case studies with regard to releases of PFAS from manufacturing in other states where they are concerned about their wildlife, right? They found PFAS in tissue, deer tissue in the state of Maine. And so they've said you cannot hunt in these counties because PFAS has impacted the deer population. Different states are making different decisions about what they're going to regulate and what they're not going to regulate. I think your water system has done a very good job of turning off the wells as soon as they found out. I would remind you that the health advisory, so those toxicological studies are based on animal studies, right? So as far as concerns for dogs and animals and livestock, those concerns may be real, but the health advisory level is over a lifetime of exposure. And animals that go to providing meat for us are not living for 70 years, right? So their exposure is much, much less. As far as your pets, I have dogs. I love my dogs. I'm very glad that I'm on a water system and don't have a private well because I know that the water system is aware of it and taking care of me.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, ma'am, thank you very much.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, would now be a good time to just mention the fact that we've been approached by folks who would like us to participate in one of those lawsuits that we were just talking about?
Yeah, it sounds like it's a good time.
Now's as good a time as any. Well, very quickly, costs are coming down the road, obviously. Whether the regulations catch up or not, we've already incurred costs. We've closed down 4 of our wells. And so one of the ways to get money, of course, is to participate in litigation. We understand that the city of Tucson and those folks are in their own litigation process, but the city of Tempe apparently is joining a different group, and they are involved with, I think, a broader lawsuit against 3M and a number of other companies. And we've, because we made the news, along with the city of Prescott, we've been approached by those law firms, and they have come to us and said, hey, look, right now we've only got 1 client in Arizona, but we've got numerous clients throughout the country, and we have a plan. We believe that we can sue, I think they're suing approximately 41 different companies right now. And they are looking at the issue of the foam, but they're also looking at all of the various products and making an argument that water systems and treatment systems for our effluent are being impacted in lots of different ways. And even if we're not right next to an airport, there is an argument that we have been damaged and that we can participate. So they've actually prepared a complaint, and they've given us a sample agreement, and they've encouraged us to join them early on. And one of the challenges, of course, is that we're a bit early in the process. We're ahead of some other communities, even larger ones, in terms of the amount of testing that we've done. But we are right there with the city of Prescott, and we are aware that city of Prescott was approached by these same attorneys. It's 3 different law firms. And they have spoken with them, and they are considering the possibility of participating with them. And it would be done, as you're aware, with the way you often do these large lawsuits. You don't pay up front. You pay if you get a judgment. They're proposing that they would get 25% of anything that might be collected down the road. So we just wanted you to be aware that we have been approached. We've spoken with these folks. They've given us some information about it. We encouraged them to speak with the League of Cities and Towns, and they've done that. And they're actually meeting with the League of Cities and Towns and all of the other municipal attorneys in the state in a matter of weeks to see if they also want to participate. So right now, the sense in Prescott, I was told, is that they may participate, and we may want to join with Prescott in doing that. Do you have any thoughts about that, just off the top of your head?
Well, the town would be out nothing if we don't do anything. So, I mean, if we go ahead and give it a shot and we get something, then obviously it's beneficial to us and help recoup some of our expenses.
Yeah, the only issues out there are sometimes state agencies would prefer that we do things together and that we not participate in various different lawsuits. They would like perhaps to control that. Sometimes the Attorney General likes to do that. And so we have, as I said, talked to the league, and we're kind of watching to see what they might do. But the flip side, of course, is that if we join early, we've gotten in on the ground floor.
Exactly. Thank you, sir. And I'm sure this is something we'll end up discussing at a later date as well. Mr. Wadsworth, you're up.
Thank you. So continuing on, I know you've got a lot of information there, probably raised a lot of questions. I'm going to give you more information, and it's probably going to raise even more questions. So I'm going to talk about Prescott Valley and locally what's going on here and what have we done. I'm going to talk about the status of our water quality testing, the test results, actions we've taken, and then what's next on the horizon for us. And there may be some gaps in this presentation. Some of the stuff that Paula presented, I just recently have seen, and so there may be questions that I don't answer. Please chime in if there's anything that you need to ask. So We have tested all 27 of our water production wells. All but 2 of them have come back. Those 2 are still pending. I believe those tests were just sent in 2 weeks ago. Those 2 wells were not operational when we did the original testing, and so once we got those operational, we took those tests, sent them in. Out of the 25, 4 of those came back positive, as you're all well aware, and I'll show you a map here in a minute to show you which wells that those were. Once we learned that those wells tested positive, we did shut them down, and that was done within hours of receiving those results. I have received questions from citizens about, were those wells serving me, or how are we going to get our water, and some of those sorts of things. As you're well aware, we have a very robust water system. We have the ability to move water around from different wells. Just because a well is in your neighborhood or in your area doesn't mean that's the only well serving you. It doesn't even mean that that well is serving you. It could be turned off, and there could be water coming from other parts of the town. With all 27 wells operational, we have a pumping capacity of 20 million gallons per day. Our citizens on an average day will use just under 6 million gallons per day. During the hottest part of the summer, we might be up to 8 to 8.5 million gallons per day. So we have a lot of excess capacity built in for reasons such as this. I mean, we obviously didn't plan on this, but wells get taken out of service to get repaired. You have mechanical failures. You have to clean them, and they're out of service for a month or more. So there's always things that can come up. So we have to have redundant capacity. If you subtract out the capacity that we have lost from these 4 wells, we still have 16 million gallons per day of pumping capacity. So we're not in any danger of telling people, don't use your water today. Okay, so anyways, those 4 wells are off. We're not serving water from those wells. We plan on leaving them turned off until we get some resolution and determine actually what we're going to be doing, or if we need to get treatment on those wells. But a lot of these things are still up in the air at this point in time. So at this point, we're still learning and trying to figure out which way to go. In addition, the influent and effluent to the wastewater treatment plant have been sampled, and both, not surprisingly, have come back with PFAS chemicals detected. So Paula was talking about PFAS compounds, and she was, talking real specifically about PFOA and PFOS, and then the other 10,000, 20,000 other types of chemicals, PFAS-type chemicals that are out there. Well, we can't test for all of them. When we have a generic test done, the laboratory runs a test, and they give you the results for what they were able to test for, and these are the compounds that they tested in our samples. These are all abbreviations for a lot bigger names, which I just thought I'd throw up there just because it's fun to look at. So anyways, yeah, these are all big compounds. They have long names, and those were the ones that we've tested for. I'm not 100% sure yet, and maybe Paula can answer this a little bit later, but when EPA actually issues maximum contaminant levels for the PFAS chemicals, are they just looking at PFOA and PFOS? She mentioned 2 others, Gen X and PFBS, that have health advisory levels already. So are we then just looking at those 4, or are there others that we're going to be looking at? I don't know the answer to that yet.
Can you pronounce that last one?
No. I mean, I could, but it wouldn't come out good.
Okay.
So on the sampling that we've done, it's summarized here. The wells are shown on the left, and the treatment plant is shown on the right. There's a lot of information you can get from this, and I don't know whether it means anything or not. I've highlighted the compounds that showed up both in the drinking water and the wastewater. So there's some that are maybe showing up in water that aren't showing up in wastewater and vice versa. but there are a number that are common to both. You'll notice that the Quailwood number 2 well has significantly higher concentrations than anything else on that list, including the wastewater treatment plant. People want to know, well, is the wastewater treatment plant the source of some of the contamination? You know, things are getting dumped into sewers from maybe businesses that don't exist anymore or businesses that are here now. Is it getting into the treatment plant, and then is it going and getting in our water? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but the concentrations coming out of the treatment plant are fairly low. Probably not the source of Quailwood 2 concentrations, because those are much higher, even though Quailwood 2 is downstream from the treatment plant. Quailwood 3 is also downstream from the treatment plant. And then if you're looking at these and you look at the effluent numbers and the influent numbers, why is there an effluent number on the wastewater, the last one there at 28? That's higher than anything that was even detected in the influent. So how is that happening? All very good questions. Okay. So we do have a lot more work to do to understand what exactly is going on. We may not ever find out exactly what's going on. There may be some other questions related to this. I'm going to go forward for a second here. So here's a map which, if you can see the blue dots, those are the 27 wells that the town has. The 4 bullseyes are the 4 wells where the PFAS chemicals were detected, and the star is the wastewater treatment plant. So these wells are not all located in one central place where we have a contamination issue. They're spread out. The one on the very northern side, at the far top of the screen, that's our Little Pete well, drilled 2 years ago. It's out in the middle of nowhere. So I doubt there was any manufacturing out there ever. So is that a groundwater issue? We don't know. If you go back and look at the concentrations for Little Pete, we detected PFOA at 1.8. The detection level that the laboratory was giving us on all of these compounds was somewhere between 1.6 and 1.8. So Little Pete, the detection level on that one was 1.8, and that's what we got, or pretty close to it. And the detection level varies a little bit depending on the sampling that they're doing, but so don't know why that one was detected there and at such a low concentration. You know, some of the other thoughts we've had and we've wondered about, obviously Teflon has been mentioned as a source of the original contaminants and so forth. Well, a well is put together with pipe, with threads and joints, and as anybody knows, or not anybody, but most people know, plumbers use things to put those pipes together. Teflon tape, pipe joint compound. Well, our wells going 600 feet down into the ground have joints every 20 feet. What are we using on the joints? So is that a source of any of the compounds that we're seeing? You know, so is drilling a new well going to help us? Or, you know, how do we do, you know, these are all things we're just starting to struggle with and trying to understand and think about. We don't know what the source of those compounds are. So as I was saying, they're all spread out. One in the middle of town here, one in the north side of town, and 2 down on the southeast side. Those 2 are both downstream from the treatment plant. One of them had much higher levels than what's coming out of the treatment plant. One of them had levels about the same, and is about the same as what we were detecting at the Lake Valley well in the middle of town. So I told you I was going to give you a lot of information and probably raise a lot of questions as well, because I'm still working my way through a lot of this.
Hey, Neil?
Yes.
If you look right there down on Bradshaw Mountain Road, you got a big one with the red, and then right close to it, you got 2 small wells, correct?
Correct.
So it's amazing that you only got one that's contaminated right there. The other 2 are really close.
Correct. And Quailwood well number 1, which came back clean, is located closer to the Agua Fria than Quailwood 2 is. Now, Quailwood 2 is sitting right on Highway 69, so, you know, is that related to something? Or was there a manufacturing site years ago? Who knows? But yeah, so these are all things where, it's going to take some digging, and you still may not put all the pieces of the puzzle together. We have wells up in the North well field, very close to Little Pete, that also did not test positive. So, we were originally thinking, okay, with Prescott and their airport well being up in that area, but further to the west, we were worried, could we get contamination that far? And so Little Pete has concentrations detected, but it's farther east than that other line of wells and closer to the Prescott area wells, and yet they were non-detectable. So was that one, and so that's why our first thoughts on that one was, that's a very low concentration, none of these other wells. Is it Teflon tape? We don't know yet. But you're correct, when you look at all of the other wells in the area, adjacent to, next to, around, whatever, that did not have detection. And then, of course, a lot of the detection, so we tested back in 2015 with a number of wells. We tested up in the up in the central part of Prescott Valley in 2015 and got no detect on the Lake Valley well, the one that tested positive this year.
Testing for the same stuff?
Testing for the same types of stuff, correct. The PFOA, PFOS. Why is that? Well, Paula mentioned the reduction in the health advisory levels. The other thing that's happening with the reduction in health advisory levels kind of at the same time is getting lower and lower detection levels. The laboratories are becoming better and better at detecting these things at lower concentrations. So looking at the 2015 results, the levels that they were able to test down to there were about 6 or 7 contaminants that were tested for back then. The range was between 20 and 40 parts per trillion. So now we're testing down to less than 2 parts per trillion and we're detecting it. So was it present back then? Yeah, it could have been. And in 2018, we tested three additional wells in the lower area, actually closer to the Prescott Country Club, also non-detects. That level was at 2.7 parts per trillion, so quite a bit closer to the numbers we're testing at this year. But again, those 3 wells also tested or did not test positive this year either. So yeah, a lot of things to think about. We've got a lot of learning to do. We're glad that ADQ is here to help us, and we're trying to use our resources. So what are the things that we're doing? Well, number one, we're continuing to try to get guidance from the state and federal agencies on where are they going with their maximum contaminant levels that they're going to be promulgating. So where are those going to end up at? Can we identify sources of these PFASs locally? And if we can, does it mean anything? If they're gone, they're not using them anymore, or the business has moved out, great. But we still have the issues to deal with. It may mean that the concentrations aren't going to get any higher because there's not a continuing source, and we just have to deal with what's left over. So moving forward with our wells, we can do a number of things. We can potentially do blending of the water from multiple sources. That's not going to be possible at all of our well sites, but it might be in the North well field. We can look at wellhead treatment. Paula mentioned granular activated carbon and ion exchange. Next week, my team is heading down to the valley, and we're going to be looking at an ion exchange facility and an activated carbon facility to get an idea of what it takes. What are your maintenance costs? You've got to change out media. What does that take, and how much does that cost? How much does it cost to build one of these? If we have to do it at a well, we're potentially looking at $1.5 million, $2 million a site, possibly.
Is that per well then?
Yes.
Per well.
Per well.
Yes. Without having specific, I will not be surprised if it's in those ranges. I'm hoping not, but that's what it's looking like. And so, as I said, we'll be visiting those sites. We'll be looking at what types of technology would be best suited to our system. And it could be different at every site. and what are those costs and so forth. We do intend to leave the 4 wells off until we have a better understanding of what needs to happen at those sites. Hopefully EPA will promulgate some rules sooner as opposed to later, because otherwise, you know, they haven't put any information out there. Nothing that they've put out is related or has any regulatory teeth. They are not maximum contaminant levels. So theoretically, we could go out and turn those wells on today and say, hey, we meet safe drinking water criteria, and we do. But is that what our citizens want to see? Is that what we want to see? Yeah, I don't think so. So we have to figure out where we're going with this and what it means to us. With that, I will open it up for questions.
Just one thing for all of our listening audience. Could you go over the difference between Influent and Effluent, and also how we recharge our system currently?
Influent is the wastewater that leaves your home, and it's before it gets to our treatment plant, it's called Influent. After it's run through the treatment plant and been treated, and as it's being discharged, that's called Effluent.
Okay.
Yes, and the second part of your question was related to
How do we recharge our system currently?
recharge.
Because we are doing recharge to the aquifer.
Yeah, so recharge to the aquifer occurs in the Agua Fria River within the first 2 miles downstream from the treatment plant. The water soaks into the ground. And we have a recharge facility that's a mile north of the wastewater treatment plant where water is put into ponds and allowed to percolate into the ground.
Thank you. Just thought maybe that would be helpful to people who are listening that maybe aren't aware. So
Yes.
thank you for that.
Councilwoman?
Well, the wells that tested positive, were they just tested the one time, or did they get a retest after testing positive?
The 4 wells that tested positive this year, we actually retested them, and we actually pulled duplicate samples and sent those samples to 2 different laboratories. Most of those have come back and are being confirmed as positive from both laboratories.
Okay. I was just trying to, because the numbers are baffling, and I was just wondering if there was a level of false positives or just any errors within the testing process itself, but obviously you got that covered as well, so.
There was some question on some of the samples where they send a, I believe it's called a travel blank, which is a sample of water that they send up with the actual sample bottles. So what you do is you take this travel sample, clean water, and you pour it from one bottle into one of their sample bottles, and you have that tested as a travel blank. So if you've sampled something and you've done something incorrectly in how you're, collecting a sample, potentially it could show up. So if there was, as Paul had mentioned, if you have sunscreen on your hands and you're going to contaminate the sample, it should show up in that travel sample also, because you're using your hands, you're pouring the sample from one bottle into another. So you do that, and then you also then take another bottle, and you actually take it from the source that you're sampling. And in one case, those travel blanks were not able to be analyzed because of some problems from the manufacturer that sent those, that manufactures those travel blanks. They were incorrectly done, and so, but the other laboratory results came back, and they showed that they were still positive at that location.
And then also, further south of those wells in Dewey, there is a Superfund site out there, right, in Dewey Humboldt?
At the Iron King mine.
Yeah, and so is there any connection with similar compounds or anything that could have?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, it's not to say that they couldn't have those kinds of compounds there. But being further south, I mean, the general direction of groundwater flow is heading south, leaving the basin, following the Agua Fria down, to Lake Pleasant and down there. So I wouldn't think that would happen.
Okay, I want to figure it out. This is crazy. Thank you.
Anything else for Mr. Wadsworth? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Davidson? This concludes it. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. And if you stick around, we're going to have a ribbon cutting for the Yava line and then council meeting at 5:30.